Welcome to NOAA Live. My name is Lisa Hiruki-Raring, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. This series is sponsored by NOAA's Regional Collaboration Network, which is spread across the country and helps connect people to all that NOAA does. It's also sponsored by NOAA Science Camp here in Seattle and Washington Sea Grant, also located here in Seattle at the University of Washington. NOAA Science Camp is a hands-on summer science program that in other years is held in person at our NOAA Western Regional Center in Seattle. And it's designed to show you how NOAA science touches your everyday life and how NOAA offices work together to address environmental issues. Since this summer we're going online, we wanted to put together a series of webinars to give you a look at the kinds of science and opportunities that NOAA has to offer in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. This is the second webinar in a series of 4 that we designed to help you get to know NOAA. All of our speakers work for some part of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Today, we're introducing you to Cathy Laetz from NOAA Fisheries Northwest Fisheries Science Center in Seattle, Washington. While we'll be talking about NOAA's role in research and stewardship, we want to recognize that we're all coming to you from the traditional lands of Native communities who have substantial traditional and local knowledge and much to share with us. So we acknowledge that Cathy's work is along the waterways and coastlines of the Puget Sound here in Washington, which are the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, the traditional home of all the tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Squamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations who have been stewards of their lands and waters for thousands of years. We would also like to acknowledge that we are hosting this webinar from the traditional lands of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. And I think that Cathy will be switching to her slideshow while I'm doing this. So a few guidelines before I hand you over to our speakers. You guys are all muted because we have a lot of people on the line and I want to make sure that everyone can hear our speaker. However, there's a box that says questions where you can write questions, and we encourage you to ask them as we go, and I'll be keeping track for Cathy. She'll stop every now and again and answer a few questions, and she may also ask you guys to type in answers to some of the questions that she's asking. We may not get to all of our questions, but we'll try to answer as many as we can. And also, if you have any problems with audio, try exiting out of the webinar and then signing back in, because that will take care of problems in most cases. Okay, so enough talking. I'll hand it over to Cathy to introduce herself.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lisa, for that lovely introduction. I'm bummed that we can't be together for Science Camp, but I really appreciate everyone tuning in to these webinars. So today I am going to be presenting some information. The title of my talk is, like Lisa said, Swimming in Dirty Water. I'm going to be talking about pollution impacts and fish health. Before diving into that, I wanted to give just a little bit of background about me. Since we can't be together in person, I just wanted to give you a little bit about information about this person who will be talking to you from behind the computer screen for the next few minutes. I grew up in the lovely state of Michigan, swimming in Lake Michigan. I was always interested in science in school. It's a subject that just always was very interesting and captivating to me. After school, I continued on and got a bachelor's degree in oceanography from the University of Washington here in Seattle. Then I went on to do a master's degree from Stony Brook University in lovely Long Island, New York. And ever since then, I have been a research scientist here at the Northwest Fisheries Science Center. I work in an ecotoxicology laboratory, and our focus is studying the effects of chemical pollution on fish and fish habitats. We do this by doing controlled laboratory experiments, experiments out in the field. We share our results with scientific audiences and other science colleagues. And we also like to share our information with school groups, NOAA Science Camp, and other venues like that. In addition to working full-time as a scientist, I'm also a mom to these kids down here in the lower left-hand corner. My daughter will be going into 5th grade in the fall. My son will be going into 9th grade in the fall. And 100% of the time, I am an unapologetic science nerd. So today I am going to be talking about some of the common types and sources of chemical pollution into the aquatic environment. I'm going to be sharing some of the biological effects of that pollution on fish. And then I'm going to wrap up with some overall conclusions and leave you with some actions. So a lot of times when I'm giving these kinds of presentations, I get questions about, well, pollution. So when you're talking about pollution, people sometimes think of the big pieces of pollution that you can sometimes see floating out in the ocean or in the lakes, plastic bags, straws, things that are very visual, floating around out there, and that pose a very immediate and discrete harm to aquatic organisms, fish and other creatures that come across these sources or these types of pollutions. I'm unfortunately not going to be talking about those today. That is a whole other topic that is worthy of an entirely different webinar, because there's a lot of really great information and science behind that topic. Today, I'm going to be talking about chemical pollution, the pollution that you can't really see with just your eyes. So this kind of pollution that I'm going to be talking about comes from many sources, but all of them come back to us. People, we are the ultimate source of much of the pollution that we see in the environment. The chemical pollution that I'm talking about today comes from the places where we live. We use a lot of chemicals in and around our houses and the apartment buildings that we live in. It's just part of our daily lives. A lot of pollution also comes from motor vehicles, the cars and buses and trucks that we see zooming along the roadways every day. The industries and factories that make all of the goods and materials that we use in our everyday lives are also significant sources of pollution into the environment. The agricultural areas, the farms that grow and produce the food that we eat every day. And sometimes even the unfortunate catastrophic event like a major oil spill. The picture down here in the bottom left-hand corner is from the Deepwater Horizon tragedy that happened about 10 years ago. These can also be significant sources of pollution into the environment. So considering all these sources of pollution, how exactly does it get into the aquatic environment? Well, one of those main methods of delivery into the aquatic environment is from rainwater. All of this pollution that we are creating kind of coats the land surface. It coats the impervious surfaces, the concretes, the rooftops, all of these areas. And then when it rains, the rainwater does a really nice job of collecting all of that pollution. That rainwater typically goes down storm drains, gets channeled into pipes, which goes into bigger pipes, and ultimately gets discharged, hopefully into a sewage treatment plant where it is somewhat treated before going out into the environment. But some of this stormwater also goes directly into the streams, rivers, and oceans that we all live around. Now, if you would put on some scuba gear and you would dive into Puget Sound, which is the large marine water body right next to Seattle, you might come across a pipe like this. This is the end of what we call a CSO pipe, a combined sewer overflow. This is part of the sewer system. And when it rains a lot, like it does in Seattle quite often, all the pipes in the sewage system doesn't have enough capacity to hold all of those toilet flushes, all of the sinks draining, and all of that rainwater. So sometimes what happens is called an overflow event, where some of this rainwater, this stormwater, is discharged directly into the receiving water body, in this case, Puget Sound. And what you're seeing here is a time-lapse video of a discharge event. The diver who went down and recorded this timed it really, really nicely and caught this discharge event coming out. Now, I have a couple of questions, and here's your opportunity to answer these questions into the chat window. And Lisa is going to help me out with this. So we're here, we're underwater, we're in Puget Sound. This is a marine water body. Does that mean it's freshwater or saltwater? You could take a second and type that in.
So what Cathy was asking is whether you think that the things that are coming out of this pipe are freshwater or saltwater, and you can type it into the question box. I can see that a lot of people are typing in that they think that it's saltwater. In fact, I think just about everybody is saying that it's saltwater. Oh, we've got Gabriel is saying that it's freshwater. Nora is saying that it's freshwater. Porter is saying that it's saltwater. Julie, Isabella, Paul, Allison, and Kira are saying that it's saltwater. So we've got mostly saltwater guesses or answers and a few freshwater. And then Oliver said that it was brine or brackish water. So
Oh,
what do you think, Cathy?
those are all insightful answers. Puget Sound, where we are scuba diving right here, is actually saltwater. Marine water means saltwater. So good answers, thank you. So the second question I'm going to ask, the plume that you see coming out here, the stormwater, the source of pollution, considering that that is coming from rainwater that is flowing into the pipes and coming out the end of this pipe, is stormwater freshwater or saltwater? If you could type in that answer, and Lisa's going to help me field those answers again.
Okay, we've got a pretty smart bunch of people here. We've got, so Anya, Julie, Cindy are saying freshwater. Ahana is saying stormwater. Kira saying it's yuck. Gabriel is saying it's polluted freshwater. A couple folks are saying that it's saltwater, but most people are saying that it's freshwater.
Yes, very insightful answers again. The stormwater that we're talking about is indeed freshwater. It is yucky. It is very often polluted. So those are good answers, and it is freshwater. So what we're seeing here, sometimes kids ask me, is this smoke? It looks like smoke billowing out the end of this pipe. No, it's underwater, and what you're seeing is chemistry in action. So the fresh water that's coming out is meeting the salty Puget Sound, and because fresh water is less dense, it is very quickly rising to the surface. So I just wanted to throw in that little science aside right there. So moving on, you don't always have to put on scuba gear in order to see one of these stormwater discharge events. Sometimes you can see it on your walk to work. This picture was taken by a colleague of mine on his walk in to work one morning. And this is the same type of event. This is a stormwater discharge event. This is occurring in a water body that's called the Montlake Cut. This is connecting Lake Washington to Lake Union. For the folks that live in Seattle, you've probably driven over the bridge that this picture was taken from many times. The laboratory that I work at is actually just behind the trees on the left-hand side of the picture. So what we're seeing here is a stormwater discharge event, and this pipe just happens to be towards the surface of a fresh water body. So if you were a chemist and you walked down to the edge of this water and you had a water sampling bottle with you and you took a sample of this water and took it back to the laboratory, what do you think you would measure or you would find in this stormwater that's coming out the end of this pipe? So here's another opportunity for you to type in some answers into the chat window. Lisa's going to help me read off all those answers. Spelling doesn't matter. Wild guesses are totally fine. What do you think are some of the chemicals, some of the pollutants that we would find in this stormwater?
Okay, thanks, Cathy. And I did get a couple of questions because we used the term chat window, but the chat window is actually the questions box that's on your menu, and a lot of people have figured that out. But for those of you who are a little worried that you're missing something, it's the question box, and we are having answers pouring in here. So Isabella says that it's mud. Porter says it's oil. Meseret says that it's chemicals. Cindy says that it's farm chemicals. We've got brackish, oil, sewage, oil, bathroom water, human waste, dead plankton, and yuck, which is what Anya said, or no, what Paul said. Anya said carbon dioxide, pesticides. Kiefer said pesticides. A lot of people are saying poop. Let's see, chemicals, CO2, carbon monoxide. Texas said a lot of bad stuff. And so it looks like it's a mix of, like, you know, people talking about sewage, fertilizer, different kinds of chemicals, carbon dioxide, chlorine, oils, antifreeze, insecticides, carbon, phosphate, herbicides, sewage, oil, chemicals. So there's a lot of variety in the answers that are being given here.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some great answers. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, we would find all of that stuff. And we would also find a little bit more. So here is layered on some of the categories or types of pollutants that we typically find in water like this. Heavy metals like zinc, mercury, and lead. We do find pesticides and herbicides, those chemicals that we spray on our lawns and on agricultural fields to kill insect pests and weeds. We in fact find medications that people use to live healthier lives. Antidepressants, statins, heart medications, all of these we find in stormwater. Interestingly, we find a lot of caffeine. There are a lot of coffee drinkers, me included, out there, and caffeine is very, very commonly found in stormwater like this. We find some crazy chemicals like dibenzothiophenes, surfactants, perfluorinated compounds, polybrominated diphenyl ethers, things that are really hard to pronounce. And most of the time, we don't know the effect that these chemicals are having on fish and fish habitats. And this is a really interesting and potentially problematic situation. So this is where my laboratory steps in and we say, hey, we can measure all of these chemicals out in the environment, but what effect are they having on the fish? This is a question that we need to answer. So I am going to, yeah, was that a question
of what things do you see the most often? And I also wanted to encourage our viewers to type in questions if they have any for you. So the question was, what things do you see the most often when you're looking at something like this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It really depends on what time of year we sample and where exactly we sample. But there are some chemicals that are very persistent in the environment, which means that they hardly ever break down or decompose into something that's less harmful. Things like DDT, PCBs, these are chemicals that are no longer used. We stopped using them decades ago, but because they never break down, bacteria can't break them down, sunlight doesn't break them down, they persist in the environment kind of for forever. So those are some of the chemicals that we always find. Some chemicals from oil and gas, because there's lots of sources for those pollutants, we typically always find those in stormwater as well. So really good question. And kind of an interesting aside, I have colleagues who can seasonally measure cinnamon in stormwater. Usually the time of year is right around Thanksgiving, when people are doing a lot of cooking of pumpkin pie and other delicious sweets that use a lot of cinnamon. You wash out that mixing bowl and it enters the wastewater stream, and we can measure cinnamon in the environment. And there's a nice peak of abundance right around Thanksgiving. It's pretty amazing.
We did get another question about this particular picture because as you can see, there's graffiti along the sides of the Montlake Cut. And one of the questions from Cole is there any paint from the graffiti?
Oh, that's a good question. There might be. Paint generally isn't a good thing to put down the drain and to intentionally make part of the wastewater stream. There's actually kinds of paint that have a chemical called tributyl tin in it. And this kind of a paint is used on the bottom of boats. Not so much used anymore, but it used to be very, very common because it kept barnacles and other critters from attaching and growing onto the bottom of boat hulls. And this paint was very good at killing those critters, but also very good at being toxic to everything else that was in the water. So there are some paints that are very, very dangerous, but generally these paints on the side are probably, in the grand scheme of things, not a huge source of toxicity to this water. So moving on, I wanted to highlight 3 chemicals that we typically find. One of them is copper, one is oil, and one is this mix of unknown number and types of chemicals that we are just going to call stormwater. So the first one I want to highlight is copper. Copper is a heavy metal. It's mined from the earth. It's used to make pipes and wire, rain gutters, vehicle brake pads. It used to be very commonly in our pockets in pennies. Currently, pennies are only about 2.5% copper. The rest of the penny is actually zinc. So right now, motor vehicles are one of the largest non-point sources of copper pollution into the environment. And specifically, they come off of the brake pads of vehicles. This picture on the bottom right-hand side is a picture of a vehicle wheel with the tire taken off. And you can see the vehicle brake pad. So every time you put on the brakes, the brake pad squeezes together, and that friction is what slows down the car. Well, that friction also creates copper dust. Copper is in the vehicle brake pad, and every time you squeeze the brakes together, little pieces of copper dust fall down onto the roadway. It rains, and that copper becomes part of the stormwater stream. Now, copper is really interesting because it has a very specific biological effect, and it damages the olfactory system, or the sense of smell, in fish, specifically salmon. The picture here is an adult salmon, and the yellow circle is around the fish's nose. And the organ, the nose on the inside of the fish, is called the olfactory rosette. And a microscope picture of that rosette is in the bottom left-hand picture. If you would take a piece of that rosette and put it under a scanning electron microscope, which are the 2 images on the right-hand side, we can see some really interesting features on the surface of this rosette. Specifically, looking at the cells on the surface, we see in the top picture lots of cilia. These are these white hair-like projections off of the cell. And the cilia is actually the part of the cells that detect odor molecules in the water. So this is how the fish is smelling odors in the water. If you expose this fish to copper, the result is what you see in the bottom right-hand picture. The copper actually kills the cilia on the layer of cells on the fish's nose. And this fish can't smell anymore. Without cilia projecting into the water, it has no way of detecting odor molecules in the water, and the fish can't smell. The sense of smell is very important for fish like salmon, especially juvenile or young salmon, because this is one way that they know a predator is nearby. A predator is a bigger fish or a bird that is trying to eat them. And if a predator comes by and happens to eat one of the juvenile salmon, that action releases an odor into the water that the other salmon sense, and that tells them, oh no, danger, I need to duck and hide. And this is a little cartoon showing this process. So a big scary predator comes along, eats one of the juvenile salmon, the odor is released, and that tells the other juvenile salmon, danger, I need to duck and cover and wait until this big scary predator gets out of the area. So this freezing response is a very typical behavior, and it depends on their sense of smell. When we expose fish to copper, they can't smell anymore, which means that they're much more prone to getting eaten by predators. And there's a lot of predators that like to eat juvenile salmon. They occupy a very important part of the food web in the aquatic environment. They connect lower portions of the food web with higher portions of the food web, so a very key middle part. They are eaten by predators like river otters, bigger fish like trout, and birds like heron and kingfisher. And if salmon, juvenile salmon, are exposed to copper, They can't smell anymore. They're much more prone to getting eaten by this suite of predators. That means there's fewer juvenile salmon that will grow up into adults and carry on the next generation. So at this point, I wanted to take just a little brief check-in. And Lisa, are there any questions that have popped up in the question box?
Yes, Cathy, we've got a lot of questions here that are,
Good.
we've got, let's see. So there are a couple of questions about the copper. Cheryl had asked, is there some way that we can reduce that copper from coming off our brakes or from using our brakes?
Yes, there is. So this is one of the very, very exciting moments about being a research scientist. This research on copper was actually noticed by the Washington state government. They asked some of my lab members to come in and testify before the state senate about this research. And because of this, the state passed a law banning copper in vehicle brake pads. So now all of the brake pads that are sold and used in Washington state are not made out of copper. They're made out of ceramic or some other material that is less toxic. So this was actually a really, really cool way of our science informing a law that was passed in order to help protect salmon and our environment. And other states have picked up on this law. So California, New York, Oregon, I think are states that have similar laws in place.
That's great. I also got a question from Mickey saying, how does the salmon know if the predator is bad depending on the smell, or how does the salmon know which predator is around?
Yeah, sometimes they don't know which predator it is. Sometimes the water is clear enough where they can see the predator coming and then they can hide, and they don't depend on their sense of smell. But a lot of times water clarity isn't that good. The fish can't see very far. And if there's a big trout hanging out just right around the corner, they wouldn't necessarily know it without being able to smell. And that alarm signal that I showed the video about, it depends on a group of salmon, one of them being eaten by a predator in order to release that alarm odor into the water.
Great, and I had two more questions. The first one is sort of a follow-up from the slide that you showed with the nose cells being affected by copper. And Alex asked, is the damage from copper permanent?
Great question. No, the cilia will regrow, but it takes some time. So just like if you get a paper cut on your hands, it'll eventually, skin cells will regrow and that cut will close, but it takes some time. So that's the same for salmon. Those cilia will regrow, but it probably takes a couple of days for their sense of smell to come back 100%.
Great. And then the last question I had before we're going to move on is Connor and Daniel had wanted to know, what is the favorite part of your job?
Oh my goodness, that's a hard question. You know, honestly, this is one of the favorite parts of my job, sharing our research with future scientists. Some of the questions that we are tackling in our work are really big questions, and they require a lot of scientists and a lot of folks working hard to help answer these questions and come up with solutions. So getting all of you involved and thinking about these questions and thinking about the environment from an early age, it's just really, really exciting thinking that we are going to have your assistance and your input as future scientists to helping us solve these problems.
Great. Well, I think we'll hold on to our questions from now and let you get on with the next section of your talk, and then we'll stop in a little bit to ask some more questions.
Great. So moving on to oil pollution, another happy, upbeat topic. So oil is pumped from deep underground. This crude oil is refined or cooked into different fractions: bunker oil, motor oil, jet fuel, and even gasoline. It is piped and shipped all around the world. Unfortunately, catastrophic oil spills, either from drilling rigs or from oil pipe ruptures, they can release millions of gallons of oil into the environment in a very short period of time. Also important are non-point sources of oil, or the really slow drip, drip, drip of oil coming off of leaky cars that can also release millions of gallons of oil into the environment, but over a much longer period of time. Now, studying oil is a little bit tricky because oil is toxic. It's even toxic to us. So we have to be careful as scientists working with oil. So what we do is to work with it safely in a controlled environment. Here is a picture of us making a mini oil spill in the laboratory. So these beakers are full of either oiled gravel on the left or clean gravel on the right. We're pumping water over it, and this is simulating an oil spill in the environment. In the Petri dishes that are down here have fish embryos, or very, very early life stage fish growing in them. And we are studying these fish to measure the effects that oil is having on the health and development of these fish. And oil is very interesting in that it specifically harms the hearts of developing fish. The two pictures on the right are fluorescent microscope pictures of hearts that have been stained with a fluorescent dye. So fish hearts have two chambers, one atrium and one ventricle, unlike the human heart, which has four chambers, two atriums, two ventricles. So similar, but kind of different. And the picture on the top is a control fish. And you can see that the atrium and the ventricle are in a certain orientation to each other. The picture on the bottom is showing the effect of oil exposure on the developing heart. And you can see that the orientation is different. The heart hasn't formed properly. And because the heart isn't formed or shaped properly, it doesn't function as well. So the two pictures on the right are zebrafish that we use in our oil exposures. And these are pictures that we're taking under a light microscope, very similar to the microscope that is sitting behind me. The picture on top is a control fish. It was grown in clean water. And you can see some features like the eyeball, the big black circle on the lower left, as well as the heart. And these are shown with the A and the V and the two arrows. Compared with the picture on the bottom, which is a zebrafish embryo that was exposed to oil, you can again see the eyeball in comparison, about the same size and thankfully in the same place on the embryo. But you can see here the heart is shaped differently. The ventricle and the atrium are in a different position. And what
Cathy,
you can also see,
Cathy, you
yes?
can use your pointer on your computer to kind of point to some of those things if you'd like.
Oh, good. So you can see, I can't see my cursor. Somehow my cursor has disappeared. Oh, there it is. Very good. Thank you for reminding me, Lisa. So the eyeball and the orientation of the atrium and the ventricle right here in the control healthy zebrafish. Down here, the bottom right-hand picture, the oil-exposed fish, you can also see the eyeball, but right here, the ventricle and the atrium and the heart, it's oriented differently. And the other feature I wanted to point out was this big bubble right here. This is something called edema or swelling. This is fluid that has built up because the heart isn't working properly. This fish can't regulate the fluid balance inside its body anymore. And this is not a healthy situation for this fish to be in. In fact, this edema is so bad that this fish on the bottom would not survive to adulthood. And interestingly, this type of edema is also seen in people when we get something called congestive heart failure. So some of the health effects that we can see in humans, we also see in fish. Now, oil itself is composed of thousands of
Cathy,
different...
can I just interrupt for a moment? We got a question from Kira that said, what is just above the eye that is so large on the control but so small on the oiled? You might have a little thing on your control panel that will allow you to change your pointer into a highlight. But so let's see, on the control, on the oil, there's something that's large on the control but not on the oil. And I
Oh,
think it
what
might,
you might be seeing is over here, if you're seeing this, this is the yolk sac. So this is all the food, much like a chicken yolk, a chicken egg, when you crack it open, the big yellow part is the yolk. Well, fish have that too. And yolk is the energy reserve that this baby fish is eating before it's able to swim around and catch its own food. So yeah, the yolk over here in the control fish is very big and round. Down here, the yolk has actually been pushed and indented in because the edema is so great, it's actually pushing the yolk sac to the side. So oil is composed of a bunch of different components, crazy things like naphthalene, fluorine, pyrene, chrysine. And these are pictures of zebrafish embryos that were exposed to those different chemicals that make up oil. So what we can see here is some of the chemicals are more toxic than others. So like phenanthrene up here, these fish are very, very affected by low concentrations of phenanthrene. This component of oil happens to be much more toxic than other components like naphthalene. So moving on from oil, I just want to check in with Lisa. Any last minute questions on the oil pollution before I shift to the last category that I wanted to talk about?
yes, we do have some questions about oil. So we have a question from Alex that says, is there a way for the fish to recover after the oil damage, or is it going to affect them forever?
Good question. So unlike copper, where they can regrow the cilia in their nose and regain smell, oil, no, it is not recoverable. The effects are so great, and it's affecting their heart when their heart is developing and forming. No, unfortunately, they can't recover.
That's sad. Aaron had also, or Ahan had also asked, are there any types of fish that are not affected by oil?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think so. We have studied lots of different species of fish. We've studied zebrafish, salmon, herring, tropical fish like mahi-mahi, and even yellowfin tuna. And all of those fish are showing that they are very, very sensitive to the toxic effects of oil.
And Texas had asked, how can we reduce the oil we put into the environment? And Porter was asking whether the oil is like the oil from cars, or maybe it's another kind of oil like cooking oil.
Oh yeah, so yes, the oil that I'm talking about is from cars. So it is not the cooking oil. Canola oil, olive oil, things that you have in your kitchen cupboard, that is completely different. That oil is not toxic to us or to fish, thankfully. So the oil that I've been talking about here is all like the gasoline and the oil that you put into your car. And in terms of reducing oil pollution, I will come back to that at the end of the presentation. So hold on to that thought, please.
Great. And then one last question is, Isabella had asked, what is the weirdest thing that you have seen in your job?
Man, you're asking tough questions. The weirdest thing, well, not to gross you out too much, there's been some pretty weird things. Sometimes we see, well, I guess you could call it a conjoined twin. We've seen two-headed zebrafish, and that's kind of weird. I don't know why it happened. I think it was just a fish that didn't develop properly, some genetic defect. But yeah, that one was a little bit alarming to see a two-headed zebrafish in a petri dish.
And then one final question from Samuel was, what was the mortality rate of the fish exposed to the oil and compared to the mortality rate in the control group?
Good question. So the mortality rate, again, it depends on the concentration of oil that they were exposed to. So looking at the pictures right here, the mortality rate right here in the unexposed is 0. All of these fish survived. The phenanthrene exposed fish, these guys, the mortality rate is 100%. These effects were very, very severe. The mortality rate in something like this down here in pyrene, where there's some toxicity, but it's not as severe, the mortality rate might be somewhere like 5 or 10%. So it's very variable depending on what exactly they're exposed to, as well as the concentration that they're exposed to.
Great. It's very interesting to see all of the different effects of the different types of oil. So we have a few more questions, but I'll hold on to them until you get to your next section.
Great. So the last section that I wanted to talk about is stormwater. And remember, this is the mix of an unknown number and type of chemicals that are entering after rain events into the aquatic environment. And I wanted to highlight a place that is very near and dear to my heart. We've done 15 plus years of research here, and this is Longfellow Creek here in lovely West Seattle. The city of Seattle spent several $1 million many years ago restoring this stream. They put in native vegetation, they put woody debris into the stream, they put a bunch of gravel on the bed of the stream, and it is absolutely lovely. It has attracted urban wildlife like this little river otter here, who very happily live in Longfellow Creek. And it has also attracted and continues to attract a small population of coho salmon. Now, typically when coho salmon come back to a stream to spawn, they look like this. They are very nicely, easily swimming in the stream. They are oriented to the stream flow, which means the water is hitting them nose first. So they are smelling everything that's coming downstream towards them. And they are looking for a nice gravel area to make a nest, lay eggs, and carry on the next generation of salmon. In Longfellow Creek, we were seeing something that looked a little bit different. This is a video of an adult coho salmon that has come back to Longfellow Creek to spawn, and this fish is obviously sick. It can't swim, it's a complete loss of orientation, it can't right itself, it is breathing heavily, its pectoral fins are splayed out to the side. It is showing some pretty severe signs of stress and of being sick. And our laboratory was asked to come in based on these observations and try and figure out why on earth are the coho salmon that are making their way back to Longfellow Creek, why are they getting sick and why are they behaving like this? So we started to do daily stream surveys during the spawning season, which is in the fall time here in the Seattle area, to try and figure out why these adult salmon were dying before they were able to spawn. We measured everything we could possibly think of. We measured water quality like temperature and salinity. We recorded the gender of all the fish that we saw, their length, weight, spawning condition, egg retention. We took tissue samples of every possible piece of the fish to figure out if it was sick, if it had a bacterial infection, if it had a vitamin deficiency. We took its blood to measure its hematocrit to see if there was a lot more white blood cells, which would indicate some sort of an infection. And we have been collecting this information every year for about the past 15 years to try and get a handle on what is going on. So the next video that I'm going to show, just as a disclaimer, I'm going to show us cutting open this fish. And this is just a normal part of our field sampling protocol. So if you don't want to see this fish being cut open, then just close your eyes or look away and I will let you know when the video is done playing. So as part of our daily surveys, sometimes we would find a sick fish and we would take a video and we would observe it for a while, but usually walking the stream, we would find a lot of dead fish. So to do the health surveys, that required us cutting open the fish to find out some information about it and help us figure out what was going on. So this particular fish, is this a male or is this a female fish? Quickly write it into the question. And Lisa, if you could help me with the answers that are coming in. Is this a male or a female fish?
Okay, so we have Anya, Nora, Nicole, Gavin, Alex, Allison, Sophie. Everybody is saying female. Yep, there's one person who says male, but pretty much everybody else is saying female. And
Yes.
Ehan says that it's female because there are egg sacs inside of it.
Yes, absolutely. This is a female. She is packed full of eggs. All of those red spheres are eggs. So this fish, survived a couple years evading predators out in the Pacific Ocean. It navigated its way back through the Straits of Juan de Fuca into Puget Sound, all the way into Little Longfellow Creek. And something in the water caused this fish to die before she was able to spawn to carry on the next generation of fish. So that video is done, but there's a couple pictures of some already cut open fish on the screen now. And this is showing that we observe this phenomenon very, very often. Every year during our stream surveys, we would encounter dead female fish that had not spawned. We found this in creeks all around the Seattle area, other urban creeks, and usually about 60 to 90% of the females were dead before they were able to spawn. So taking this information, this very high mortality rate, and putting it into a population model, that was telling us that some of these very small localized runs, like in Longfellow Creek, that run would go extinct within a decade or so. So within my lifetime, we would expect pollution in Longfellow Creek to make the Coho salmon go extinct in that little creek. So that was kind of alarming and got us thinking about, wow, if stormwater really is having this big of an effect, we need to look into this a little bit further. So we came up with some laboratory experiments to try and figure out kind of the range of toxicity of stormwater. So we collected stormwater that was coming off of a drain pipe off of a local roadway. The stormwater that came off sometimes was really stinky. Sometimes it smelled like cigarette butts. Sometimes there were cigarette butts floating in it, all sorts of debris. But it was usually pretty opaque, very discolored. And we took this stormwater into a controlled laboratory environment to further investigate. So for these experiments, we partnered with the Suquamish tribe. They operate a small salmon hatchery on the other side of Puget Sound across from Seattle. And they very graciously partnered with us and gave us a little bit of space at their facility. And they gave us access to some of the adult coho that were returning to their hatchery. So right here is a picture of the exposure tank. Inside each one of these 4 tubes is an adult coho salmon. Adult coho are very, very shy. They do not like a bunch of scientists staring at them in their tank. It makes them very uncomfortable. So we put them inside of these tubes so they would be shielded from the stares of scientists. So 1 fish in each of these tubes, 4 went into a series of clean water tanks, and another went into a series of stormwater tanks. And we found after about 4 hours of exposure, 100% of the fish in clean well water were normal, 100%. That's great. None of them were sick, none of them died. In the stormwater tanks, 100% of the fish were sick or dead after only 4 hours of exposure. This was a very, very dramatic result. It's consistent with what we were seeing in the field. And so this was further evidence that showed us that yes, indeed, stormwater is the source of toxicity, and stormwater is what is killing these adult salmon before they're able to spawn. So along with this, it also got us thinking about, well, we know that stormwater is toxic. Is there a way that we can clean up or filter these pollutants out of the stormwater? And for these experiments, we partnered with some amazing researchers at Washington State University in Puyallup, Washington. And we came up with these very high-tech filters. These are tubes that are filled with dirt and compost. Seriously, that's it, dirt and compost. And a few of them had some plants growing on the top as well. We would pump stormwater onto the top of these, let the stormwater filter through, and then out the bottom, we would collect that filtered water and use it in experiments with our coho. So very similar setup to what I just showed you. Fish in tubes, in clean well water, stormwater, and in the filtered or the clean stormwater. So what did we find from these experiments? Well, thankfully, we found that 100% of the fish in clean well water were normal. That's great, a consistent result with what we saw before. In stormwater, we found that 100% of the fish were sick or dead after about a 4-hour exposure. Again, since this was stormwater from a different storm, a different source, this was interesting information because it was consistent with previous results. So now the big question, what happened in the filtered stormwater? 100% of the fish were normal, 100%. This was a crazy result. In the science world, we hardly ever see results that are so stark. Usually there's some error, and usually, it's like 50%, 60%. To have 100% effect was very striking. So from this told us that, wow, the simple action of letting stormwater filter through the earth before entering the aquatic environment eliminated the toxicity for coho salmon. And from other experiments, we know that this is not only protective for the adult coho that come back to spawn, but also for the juvenile coho that are living in the streams, as well as the adorable little baby coho that are still living in their gravel nests. So coming to the end of the presentation now, thinking back on all the 3 parts of stormwater pollution, copper pollution, oil pollution, those 3 pieces that I've talked about, we know pretty well that chemical pollutants are harmful to fish and to fish habitats. The pollution that's coming from our roadways, from our land use practices, catastrophic oil spills, the stormwater that we're putting into the environment are changing some of our urban areas, making them not safe for the fish and the critters that live in those environments, and also not safe for us visiting those habitats. So that leaves us with a big question of, well, what can we do about it? Sometimes this is it can feel kind of depressing to think about all this pollution and all of these effects on the fish. And it can almost give us a feeling of being powerless about the problem. But I don't think we are powerless. I think there are solutions, and I think there are things that you and I can do to help alleviate the problem of adverse effects of pollution on fish and their habitat. So now I would love to hear your ideas. Lisa, if you could help me get some of these ideas, if they can type them into the question area, I would love to hear your ideas on what we can do about helping to fix the problem of pollution and those adverse effects on fish.
Great. So while we're waiting for the answers to come in, we did have a couple of questions about the stormwater. Sophie had asked, after filtering the stormwater, is the earth now toxic? And Alex had asked, he wasn't sure how you plan to filter the stormwater to save the fish. So if you could talk a little bit about that while we're waiting for the other answers to come in, that would be great.
Yeah, good questions. So there's still some details about filtering stormwater that we are still researching. So when the stormwater is being filtered, it is most likely bacteria that are naturally present in the compost and in the dirt that are actually eating the pollutants that are in the stormwater. So the pollution it's not like a sponge is sucking the pollution out of the water and keeping it in the dirt. It is most likely bacteria that is actually eating or removing the pollution from the stormwater itself. We are actively looking into questions like, how long can the bacteria do this? How long is one of those stormwater filters good for? Can it work on 2 storms, but then it doesn't work anymore? So we're still trying to find out some of those answers. And what was the other question, Lisa, about stormwater?
I think that Alex had asked, he wasn't sure how you plan to filter the stormwater to save the fish.
Yeah, well, we can do it pretty easily in the laboratory, because I showed the picture of those tubes. That is really easy to do in the laboratory. But thinking about how do we do this at the scale of a city? Can we filter all of the rainwater that's coming off of all of the roadways and all of the concrete surfaces in the city? I don't know. That's a really big engineering question. And I'm sure there are civil engineers out there that are very actively trying to figure that out.
I think also that people can do things in their own little world that can help with that as well. Like, and some of those suggestions might be coming up now. So some of the solutions that people have been putting in is Porter had said use a different transportation device, so like bicycles or mass transit. Isabella said spread the word. Josie said build filters over stormwater pipes. Isabella said walk places when you can. Michelle said recycle oil. Paul and Alice said build walls of dirt around the rivers. Anya said limit our use of unneeded gases and lower our carbon footprint. A lot of people saying try not to drive all the time so you don't use gasoline. August said we could make all cars electric so that there's no pollution from the roads. M said, don't stop suddenly on highways overlooking the water. And let's see, we can increase riparian zones, create legislation to stop use of chemicals like they did with copper. Mickey said, probably use fewer chemicals to help the fish. Reduce the amount of cars on the road, add more natural filtration barriers before the water gets into streams. Try using more natural cleaning supplies and use less fuel. Evelyn said filter all the stormwater and make sure to monitor all the debris that escapes during work on land. And we should make an attempt to make a fuel source for cars that doesn't leave as much pollution. A lot of people are saying drive less, don't use pesticides or herbicides, make solar panel cars, a lot of talk about putting filters on some of the main pipes. And Porter said, don't drink coffee. So yeah, there's a lot of different ideas coming out here.
Yes, great ideas. I don't think you all came up with, I didn't come up with any other ideas that you did not come up with. So that's great. I have a few ideas up here on the screen. Like Lisa was mentioning, in our own residences, our own houses, and even in apartment buildings, this would work. Plant a rain garden. Make a natural area where rainwater and stormwater can filter and naturally go into the earth instead of into a pipe and into the sewage system. Ride your bike. Those were some great answers. When you can, when it's safe to, if you can choose to ride your bike to school, ride your bike to your friend's house when we're allowed to go over to our friend's house and hang out in groups again. That's a great way of getting around that eliminates a big source of pollution, oil pollution and copper pollution into the environment. Get involved, spread the word, like someone said. If there happens to be a restoration event in your local neighborhood, at one of your local parks, maybe even at your school, this is a great way to get involved in facilitating change. And the last one over here, know what you're putting down the drain. This is a fun thing. I like to call it the shampoo bottle challenge. So the next time you are in the shower, grab the shampoo bottle, and this is very, very small fine print over here. Read the ingredients that are in the shampoo, and you will find things like, oh goodness, I have to take off my glasses for this one, methylchloroisothiazolinone. What is that? Why is it in my shampoo? Why am I putting it on my head? And what effect is this having on the fish once it gets into the environment? I don't know. Maybe we should know as a society, maybe we should know the effects that these chemicals we're using every day are having on the environment. So some of the solutions to the pollution problems are going to involve more than just scientists in the laboratory or out in the field. We need the help of environmental engineers. We need lawyers, environmental lawyers. who will advocate for the existing environmental laws that we have, and maybe advocate for some new, more protective environmental laws. We need people in government who are supportive of passing laws that will help protect the environment, environmental health, and our health as a result. So I didn't have any more slides, any other information to share with you. Thank you so much for your attention and your participation. Again, I was saddened that we couldn't do Science Camp in person this year, but thank you so much for tuning in. And if there are any last minute questions, Lisa will help me field those questions.
Well, I think we are actually just about out of time. So I think we'll have to cut off here, but thank you so much, Cathy, for your talk. We had a lot of participation, a lot of questions. And I wanted to remind everybody that's on the line that we have another webinar coming up on Monday, July 13th, at the same time, 10 a.m. Pacific. And Colleen Harpold and Ali Deary will be talking about zooplankton and larval fish. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and hope to see you back on Monday. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.